Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're diving into the story of how Google happened. And it's a story that doesn't start in some fancy boardroom, but in a dorm room with a really wild idea, a bunch of spare computer parts, and, get this, a server casing made out of Lego bricks. This is the story of how a PhD project completely rewired the internet and grew into one of the most powerful companies in the world. Everything kicks off back in 1995 at Stanford University. You've got this PhD student, Larry Page, and he's trying to figure out a topic for his thesis. He has this crazy idea. What if you could map out the entire World Wide Web by analyzing how all the pages link to each other? Well, his supervisor, Terry Winograd, basically told him to go for it. And that piece of advice, Page later said it was the best he ever got. And that one little push is what leads us into our first section, the Stanford Project. This is where Page's idea goes from a simple concept to a real breakthrough, and it's where he teams up with another brilliant PhD student, Sergey Brin. So they called their project Backrub, which, you gotta admit, is a kinda quirky name, but it perfectly described their whole idea, analyzing a website's backlinks to figure out how important it was. You have to remember, in the mid-90s, the web was just this chaotic mess. Finding anything useful was a massive headache. Backrub was their answer. Now this right here is where you can see their genius. See, back then, search engines were pretty simple. They just counted how many times a word appeared on a page. But Page and Brin's algorithm, which they called PageRank, was completely different. Think of it like this. In academics, a paper that's cited by a lot of other important papers is seen as authoritative, right? Well, PageRank did the exact same thing for the web. It measured authority, not just keywords. I love this part of the story. Their beginnings were just so humble. To handle all the number crunching for this massive project, they cobbled together a server rack using cheap hardware. And the housing for it all? It was a custom-built enclosure made entirely of Lego bricks. I mean, that is pure Silicon Valley ingenuity, right out of a Stanford dorm room. Okay, so as this thing gets bigger and bigger, they realize they need a proper name. They settle on Google. That's the mathematical term for the number 1 followed by 100 zeros. It was perfect. It captured their mission to organize this just mind-boggling amount of information. The name we all know today, Google, actually came from a common misspelling of that original idea. A happy accident, you could say.
And that brings us to our next chapter. The garage goes public. This is where the project makes the jump from a campus experiment to a full-blown corporation, and it happened at lightning speed.
The timeline here is just staggering to look at. They register the domain in 97. A year later, in 98, they're officially a company, working out of their friend Susan Wojcicki's garage. Just 1 year after that, they're turning down buyout offers. And then boom, by 2004, they're launching one of the biggest IPOs in history. You know, their very first bit of funding was a $100,000 check from Andy Bechtolsheim. But what's so amazing about this story is that when he wrote the check, he made it out to Google Inc. But the company didn't legally exist yet. Page and Brin literally had to rush out and file the incorporation paperwork just so they could cash the check. And here it is. This is one of Silicon Valley's most famous what-if moments. In 1999, Page and Brin actually offered to sell Google to another search engine called Excite. They started at $1 million, got talked down to $750,000, and Excite's CEO still said no, turned them down flat. Wow, that rejection turned out to be a multi-billion-dollar mistake, didn't it? Just 5 years after being turned down, Google's IPO valued the company at over $23 billion. It created a whole new wave of millionaires overnight from all their early employees. And what's really crucial here is that they built all this incredible growth around a core philosophy. Their letter to investors 2004 famously included their unofficial motto, "Don't be evil." It was their way of signaling that they wanted to build a different kind of company, one that really aimed to do good in the world. So now they're armed with huge resources from the IPO, and they have the most dominant search engine on the planet. Naturally, Google's ambition started to get a lot bigger. Their mission wasn't just to organize websites anymore. It was to organize all the world's information. And this is how you know you've really, truly arrived. Your product becomes so fundamental, so deeply woven into the fabric of daily life, that your company's name becomes a verb. In 2006, to Google something was officially added to the dictionary. And man, the 2000s were just this incredible whirlwind of innovation for them. First, they launched Google News. Then came Gmail, which offered a gigabyte of storage. That was totally unheard of at the time. Google Maps completely changed how we get around. And then in 2008, they went right after Microsoft by launching their very own web browser, Chrome.
But as the company ballooned into a global empire, its story got a lot more complicated. That little startup from the garage was now a behemoth, and it started facing challenges on a scale that very few companies ever have. You know the saying. As Google's products became the basic plumbing for our digital lives, its incredible power started attracting incredible scrutiny. With that great power came really tough questions about its responsibility. And those questions were coming from its own employees, from competitors, and from governments all over the world. The first real signal that a new era had begun was a massive corporate restructuring. In 2015, they created Alphabet, Inc. to be a parent company. This move officially separated the core Google Internet business from all their other ambitious, long-term moonshot projects. It was an admission that their scope had grown far, far beyond just search. And this is where things get really, really complex. The company started dealing with serious dissent from within, including those huge global employee walkouts in 2018. At the very same time, regulators in the US and Europe were launching massive antitrust investigations, accusing Google of abusing its monopoly in search and advertising. I mean, just look at this. The battles were being fought on every front imaginable. The European Commission slammed them with a multi-billion-euro fine. The US Department of Justice actually looked into forcing them to sell off their Chrome browser. And they ended up in clashes with entire countries, like Canada, over how news content should be paid for. The challenges just became global and profound. So all of this leaves us with one final, really critical question. After literally building the digital world that we all live in, Google has now entered this new era that's defined by accountability and constraint. So what on earth does the next chapter look like for the company that organized the internet?